Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ed Steinfeld. I'm the director of the Watson Institute. And because time is tight, I'm going to be very rude, and I'm going to do a very quick introduction of our guests while they're still getting settled. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome back to campus Governor Gina Raimondo, the 75th governor of Rhode Island, who took office in January of 2015 and continues through the present. We're so thrilled to have you back here to campus today for this discussion with Cathy Russell, Ambassador Cathy Russell, about politics, policy, and leadership. I'm delighted that the Watson Institute is co-sponsoring this event with the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy, and I just want to remind everybody that this event is being live streamed. I'm going to keep my introduction very brief, but as you all know, Governor Raimondo has received not just recognition within Rhode Island, but national recognition for her efforts to push entrepreneurship and education and job creation and retooling for a new economy. This is obviously important not just for Rhode Island, but for the whole country and for actually the broader global community. Governor Raimondo had previously served as General Treasurer of Rhode Island, and prior to that had founded Point Judith Capital, Rhode Island's first venture capital firm. Joining the discussion today and interviewing Governor Raimondo is Ambassador Cathy Russell. Familiar to many of you, Ambassador Russell was U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues from 2013 to 2017, and has long specialized in global women's issues, issues of gender and security, and issues of gender and development. I say you're familiar with Ambassador Russell because she's been a critical educator for us at the Watson Institute and at Brown generally. With that, let me turn it over to you, Ambassador Russell.
Thank you, Ed, very much. It's nice to see you all here. And Governor, thank you so much for doing this. When Ed and I first were talking about the ideas of women's participation, how to talk about it, it seemed so obvious that with, at a university where we have the second really impressive woman president, to be able to talk to a woman governor made a lot of sense if you want to talk about the importance of women's leadership. So thank you so much for doing that. I'd like to start with a question about your own journey. I mean, you've obviously been successful in business. You were treasurer of the state and now the governor, one of only 6 women governors in the country. And I'm just curious about whether you have been surprised along the way at the number of women who've been participating in leadership levels in the areas that you've been working. So few women governors, very few women at the top of politics across the board. And even in business, we see this as a chronic problem. And I wonder if you've seen that in your experience and whether that was somewhat surprising to you.
So hello, everybody. It's great to be with you. And thank you for having me. It is surprising. You would think that in 2017, that power would be more evenly distributed and influence more evenly distributed than it is. And it's not. Now, prior to getting into public service, I was in the venture capital business, which is also very male dominated. In my time, in my career, I probably sat on, 12 or 15 corporate boards. And maybe in that time, 1 or 2 times had another woman on a board with me. Wow. And maybe once I backed a female CEO. So it isn't just politics. I think it's surprising. When you look in the classroom, roughly evenly distributed. Men and women do well in classes. Even law school, I went to law school, same thing. Half men, half women. Lots of women on the law journal, lots of men on the law journal. But then as you go to higher positions and positions of leadership, there is a lack of diversity, which is a problem. And it's surprising. Not surprising in that I didn't know it.
Right.
Because you know it,
yeah.
But surprising to live it.
Right.
This year, every year at the beginning of the year, the president invites the nation's governors to a dinner at the White House, and then a meeting with the president and meeting with the cabinet. And this year, it was surprising, I have to say. It was almost an uncomfortable feeling at the private meeting in the White House with the president and his cabinet. Not every governor goes, so there were just 2 of us. Mary Fallin, who's the governor of Oklahoma, Republican, and myself were in the room at the time. and all guys. And you look around and you think, wow, by the way, all white.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the president's, and we had the dinner on the Sunday night, and you can bring a guest. I brought my daughter. And then the meeting the next day, and the president got up and he said, hey, it was a great party last night. It was great to be with all of you and your wives. And so, that's real life.
Well, one of the things in my job, President Obama used to always talk about, and Secretary of State Kerry as well, you can't play a game with half your team on the bench. That was kind of the analogy that always made sense to them. And we know that when there are more women in leadership, you have more representative decision-making, obviously. But there's also research to show that when you have more women in leadership, you have greater attention paid to issues like education and health issues. And so I think while we all know that the women's participation in our Congress is low, it's about 20%, which puts us way down in terms of other countries in the world relative to other countries. We have low participation at sort of the C-suite and board level for women. But I guess the question really is, okay, so what? Like, does it make a difference? As I said, the research shows that it does make a difference in the legislative branch if you have less participation. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, from what you've seen, why does it matter that we don't have more women in these situations? What's the consequence of you go to the White House and there are 2 women there? I mean, does it make a difference, and how does it make a difference?
It absolutely makes a difference. I mean, a couple things. Just yesterday was my 1,000th day in office as governor, so we kind of celebrated that and looked at what we've done and what's still left to do. But I ended the day at a really high-quality child care center in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Anyone from Rhode Island here, by the way? Any Rhode Islanders? Nice, big representation. I like that. The rest of you, after you graduate, should stay here. I'm not joking. We have this new thing called the Wavemaker Fellowship. Do you know what this is? If you're getting a STEAM degree and you work in Rhode Island for 4 years in a STEAM field, we'll pay back your student loans for 4 years. Wow. Check it out. Stay in Rhode Island. That's my commercial. Now back to your question. She thinks I'm crazy, but it's true. I can't build a great economy without top talent. Start a business, start it here. Go work at a company, do it here. Anyway, I ended my day at a child care. I ended my day at a child care center yesterday, and since I've been governor, I've increased funding every year for Head Start. Do you guys know what Head Start is? Yeah, early childhood. And also for child care subsidies. You'll see when you get there, it's incredibly expensive. And so I went yesterday, I was there, I gave ice cream to the kids, and I watched the moms and the dads pick their kids up from this child care center. And you know what? That relates to the economy. Because if you don't have a reliable, affordable, safe place to drop your kid off, you're not going to be able to go to work on a consistent basis and be a good employee. I know that because I have 2 kids. I'm a working mom, like most moms. And I know full well that I'm able to focus on my job if my children have a safe, secure, affordable place every day. Plenty of men realize that as well. I think I'm more in tune with it. And also I made the link. Investing in childcare isn't a woman's issue. It absolutely relates to the economy. Because moms and dads need to go to work. But they also need affordable childcare to make it happen. So I made that link between the economy and childcare. Also, I can tell you from personal experience, almost every time I've made a bad decision or my administration has made a mistake, it's because I was blindsided by something I didn't see. Like a complaint came out of left field, the way we communicated a message, we had a tin ear to some issue, and if I had done a better job of having more diversity around my table, someone would have brought that up. Hey, Gov, have you thought about this? And I've said, gosh, if I had just had more diversity around my table, someone would have prevented me from rolling this out poorly or making this mistake. So absolutely, it's not just being politically correct. Leaders make better decisions if they have a diversity of viewpoints around their table.
I agree with that, and I would see that in other countries as well. And we would say to them, it's not that there's some magic about being a woman or not. It's
Right,
that
exactly.
it's half the population. It's that you want all the views represented if you want to make reasoned decisions about what needs to happen.
You know, it goes the other way too. I mean, if you had a table of only women, or a table of only immigrants, or a table of only young people or only old people, you just get one point of view. Whereas if you have a diversity around you, you're just going to hear it from all angles and you make a better decision.
Emily's List, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It's an organization that helps women who are interested in running for office, progressive women. And they have been reporting that they have record numbers of women coming to them, absolutely record numbers, saying they want to run for office, which is all great. But there's research to show, which is, I think is so interesting, that on average, it takes 7 requests to a woman to encourage her to run for office before she decides to run. Whereas men are like, yeah, I'll run, why not? You know, they don't even hesitate. They think they're ready, whether they're ready or not, they just go for it. And that women really need to be encouraged. And I'm curious about whether that...
C.E.G. the man in the White House.
Yeah. No comment on that, but yeah. Did that happen to you? And I guess more broadly, how do we make it easier for women to say yes? You know, when people come to them, how do we encourage them to just take the risk, jump in? I mean, having seen how hard it is, and I know it is hard, and we did a lot of work on kind of online harassment of women candidates, because we would see that, and they would get it in really vicious ways. So I appreciate that it's difficult sometimes for women, but how do we get them to the point where they feel more comfortable saying yes to these questions?
Well, you put your finger on it, it's risk. It's highly risky. I mean, no matter how good of a candidate you are, there's not necessarily a great relationship between are you the best person for the job and will you win? So it's a risk. And women just have a harder time taking risk.
In business, too.
In business, too. It's not just politics, it's risk. I mean, I think that's also why you don't see as many female CEOs. You have to take the risk, fear of failure. You have to go for it. Oh, but by the way, there's lots of research which says, you know, women are more quickly blamed for things. So it's harder to take a risk if you're going to be easily blamed. I find that more often than not, people are more forgiving of men. Give them another shot, give them another chance. And so, you know, it's people realize that. I think more people have to do it. That's part of the reason I stay in it, actually. You know, more people have to do it. So the more female governors there are, the more there are going to be.
Exactly.
And it's just really important to get in the game and stay in the game.
And take the risk and jump
Yeah.
in. I mean, what's the worst that happens, right? You lose.
You can lose,
Which is
exactly.
not fun. I'm not suggesting that's fun. How would you describe your leadership style? If you had to, are you a sort of person who brings people together? I mean, how do you think about that? And do you think about it in any way with respect to your gender, or is it just a more general sort of approach that you have to leadership?
You know, I think it's evolving. I would say I have a bias toward action. So I'm a leader that's biased toward action, which means taking risk and sometimes not getting it right. But also your leadership style, I think, has to apply to what you're leading. So I've taken over a state that needs a lot of help. You know, when I was elected, the day I was elected, we had the highest unemployment rate in America, the worst roads and bridges in America, and you know, by a lot of measures, we had been kind of stuck for 20 years. So that's affected my style of leadership, which is go, 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 move, get a lot done, because I felt I had to do that. So anyway, also I do kind of over-communicate. People have told me I'm the most accessible governor we've ever had. I'm in the press almost every day. I do a lot of candid TV. I do a weekly live TV interview.
Do social media?
I do lots of social media, lots of out and about. And I think that's important. It's very hard today to reach people.
Yeah, that's true.
So you have to be out more than you ever have been.
So I want to ask you a question about this last election, which I think was a significant election for women. I mean, obviously there were many, many issues that we had to consider in that election and that voters took into account. But at the end of the day, we were choosing between a woman who would be the first woman president who had a long track record on women's issues and a man who, I guess to be generous, had not demonstrated a lot of interest in women's issues. I'm a diplomat, okay? I'm trying to be diplomatic. But I guess my question, for me, at the election night, I was in Indonesia. And the couple of weeks before that, I'd been traveling through Asia. And people kept saying to me, what's happening in America? We don't understand what's happening. And I was like, I can't really answer that question for you. I don't really know. But I did take it slightly personally, not for me as a person, but that we were in a position where our country would elect somebody who didn't seem to care all that much about women's issues versus somebody who obviously had demonstrated a lot of concern and dedication to making things better for women. And I realized that, as I said at the outset, it's a much broader set of issues that were being considered, but it seemed to me in some ways some of the things that he had said might be disqualifying on the gender side. But I wonder what your reaction. I'm appreciating that I was probably more sensitive to that than most people, given what I do, but I'm wondering if you had a similar reaction or a different reaction or...
So I think they should have been disqualifying. I had a similar reaction. I think a lot of people did, and they should have been disqualifying. By the way, I think you're seeing it play out. I think it's a very real question. Is he fit to be president? Does he have the temperament and respect for humanity and commitment to basic human values, to human rights, to be president? And it's playing out. Why did we as a nation allow it to happen, is a complicated answer. I also think, let's be honest about what happened. I mean, she won the popular vote. We now know that the Russians were meddling. There were a few battleground states which were lost by very small amounts. So some of it is just tactically. I think a better campaign, the same two candidates, with a better campaign, she would have won. Different result. Having said that, the question is, wow, how could it even be that close? And I think that's just a testament to how divided the country is, as much as it is gender.
Let me ask you about one of the consequences of that, which has been interesting as someone who follows politics to see, which is that the states are now stepping up on a lot of issues that they would not traditionally step up on. So climate, obviously, immigration, even trade. And it's interesting to see it. I think it's a positive movement in some ways, but it's definitely different. And obviously, you've been at the forefront of two of those issues. And I just wonder if you could talk about how you see the state's role versus the federal role, and whether this is a good change. I mean, I think it's a necessary change maybe now, but is it a good change, and is it something that you think will last?
I don't think it's a good change. So my view is that, I have a job to do. I have 1 million people depending on me to do my job. So if Congress doesn't do anything, or if the president doesn't take action, then I will. So recently, when the president made his decision around DACA, we took action in Rhode Island. I said, right now in Rhode Island, if you're a undocumented immigrant or a dreamer, you can go to our public universities with in-state tuition. We say we're going to keep that. We rolled out a program, you can go to the community college tuition free. We said that's still available for DACA folks. I raised money from foundations in order to pay for the $495 renewal fee, because people actually only have until, I think, next week to renew. When is it, John? The 5th, so this week. So, I was at a rally, in fact. I was at a rally for DACA students, and an immigration lawyer got up there and said, don't pay attention to the 6-month deadline. There's no 6-month deadline. You only have until October 5th. You need to get a lawyer and find $495. And there was like a wave of panic that went through the thing. I turned to my husband. I said, we have to do something about this. So we got a bunch of lawyers to give their services pro bono, and we raised the money philanthropically. Climate change, when the president pulled out of Paris, I signed an executive order committing Rhode Island to the Paris Accord. So I'm going to do that, but it shouldn't be that way. No. Immigration policy needs to be set in Congress for the country. Climate change, carbon tax, all this has to be done at the federal level. Now, having said that, I think if people like me continue to do this, hopefully we can kick the change up, bottom up. I think that the role the governors played in stopping the repeal of the Affordable Care Act was significant, actually. We really leaned on, we have great senators in Rhode Island who are excellent and for the Affordable Care Act, but I leaned on my Republican governor friends to call their Republican senators, and it made a difference. It definitely made a difference.
It's interesting because foreign governments are curious now about what they should be doing. Should they be talking to California about trade issues? And it's interesting to see foreigners trying to figure that out, but it is just a vacuum, right? So they're trying to figure out who's going to step into the vacuum.
I hope it's temporary. It's not a sustainable situation. And it shouldn't be that a foreign government
is thinking about
has to ask themselves whether, how to deal with the United States and if they need to do it state by state.
It's a lot of states. So I'm going to turn it over to the students in a second, but I wanted to ask you one question, which is I have spent my career in a lot of different roles, but all in the government. And honestly, it has been, and hopefully will again, be just an incredible honor and privilege to be able to do that. But I'm getting a lot of questions now from young people. I did a session with some students here earlier today, and just young people that I run across about whether, what does government service mean now? What would it mean to be working in an administration where, at least speaking for the department where I worked, State Department, they're trying to cut the department back dramatically, where they don't seem to have a lot of regard for diplomacy, for diplomats, for foreign aid, all the things that were the basic sort of bulwark of our work around the world, and they don't really see American leadership on these issues, human rights, women's issues, as important. And so they come to me and they say, what do you think? Should I go work there? Would you? And I'm like, God, that's a hard question. And so I'm going to put it to you, which is, for me, government service was, as I said, an honor, but also just a tremendous opportunity to try to do something good for the country. And I felt the weight of that, and I felt the opportunity of that, and I would hate for others to miss that. But I wonder how hard it would be to work in an administration where you don't really agree. And so one of the things I keep saying to the young people is, go work at the state level, because there's a lot of good stuff happening.
I was just going to say, you should come work for me. Definitely. We've had lots of interns from Brown, by the way. Yeah, you want a job? You can have a job. You can all have jobs. You should get into government. Yeah. That's so Cathy asked me to do this, and I was happy to do it because I admire you and your work, but also to encourage you guys to get engaged. I have a niece at Brown and a nephew in college, and I know lots of college students, and a lot of people are so frustrated they're just tuning out completely, and they want to do anything but politics, anything but government, whatever, business, nonprofit, science, and all that's good. You really need to get more engaged. You need to figure out a way to channel the anger and frustration into greater engagement. A lot of people didn't vote in November. A lot of people didn't, I'll say it, after Bernie lost, a lot of people stopped caring. And if good people don't get engaged, bad people get in office and do bad things to good people. That's a fact. So you guys have to get engaged. And I can't emphasize that enough. In whatever way you want, run for office, work for a public official, help out on a campaign, somehow make your voices heard in the dialogue. Because if you don't, then your voices will be drowned out by other voices, which is what we're seeing now.
Yeah, exactly. You have to get into the arena.
I worry about this a lot.
Yeah.
I actually worry about this a lot. If you were to say to me, what's one of my biggest challenges, it's recruiting really excellent people to work in state government. There's a lot of reasons not to do it. You know, we work a lot, you can make more money other places. People don't think it's as, necessarily cool or honorable. Except think about what we're doing. Education, the economy, the environment, immigrant rights, human rights. It's all the most important stuff there is. It's really hard. So we need top talent to go into public service. And I hope you'll think about it and figure out ways to, if you go into it, it will become, cooler to do.
Trailblazers. There are microphones on either side if you guys want to come to the microphone. I'm going to ask you one more question while they're thinking about their questions, which is, a reporter said to me once that when he interviews people, his stock question that he always asks, and he said, always ask this question, so I'm going to ask it to you, which is, he said, ask, what is it that keeps a person up at night? And not your kids, because that's what keeps me up at night too, is worrying about my kids, but just more generally, like, what is it, what do you worry about? What, in sort of your dark hours, what is it that makes you think, oh, God, I got to get up and get at it?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, have been very focused on improving Rhode Island's economy and making sure that there are just enough jobs for people. And a lot of times it feels like, yeah, we're really doing great on that. Our unemployment's way down, companies are coming here, it feels really good. And then the other day I was in the grocery store, and this kept me up all night. I met a guy, he was in front of me in line at Stop and Shop, and he said, what are we going to do about this economy? And I said, well, what do you mean? Tell me. And basically, he was probably in his late 40s. He lost his job a couple of years ago. He was a truck driver. He doesn't have he has some college, but no degree. He's got 3 kids, and he's been out of work for a while. And there's so many people in America with that profile. And it stresses me out a lot to think, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with that guy? He needs to work. He doesn't, like I said, he doesn't have a degree past high school. He's the future for truck drivers in the world of autonomous vehicles is not great. He does need a chance. He does need a job. He can't afford to go back to college. So that kept me up all night, and he's just one example, but I happen to see him, and that's the problem of America right now. I had lunch the other day with somebody who runs a huge company, and he was, you guys, Internet of Things, technology, yes? So he was talking to me about how incredible his Internet of Things new technology was. They make engines. And he said it was the case that they could take 400 data points on each engine. Now they can take 4,000 data points, which is great. It'll make the engines run better, easier to do maintenance on them, more precise, last longer, the whole thing. He estimates that instead of needing 30,000 engineers, he's only going to need about 15,000 engineers. And I said, what are we going to do with the 15,000 engineers? And he basically said, that's your problem. That's the problem of government. And I thought, not really, because people need work. People in this country need work. So that's the thing that really keeps me up all night.
We spent a lot of time, I used to work in the VP's office for Dr. Biden, and we spent a lot of time on community colleges and trying to think about how you get to the skills match, right? So if you take a community and you figure out what the needs are in the community and then have the community college training for those needs, which seems so obvious that, that's what should be happening. It's not as easy as it seems.
But it's actually hard. So take this, my friend from Stop and Shop. First, he has to get up the confidence to go to our CCRI. Then he has to find the money to pay for CCRI. Then he has to figure out how to get there. I don't know what his skills are. I don't know where he starts relative to the skills that are actually needed for a job of today. And oh, by the way, then he'll do whatever job that is for 5 years and then need to be retrained. And there's a human element of it too. So
There is.
it's hard. It's
I also
just
saw
hard.
some research which was interesting about how in a lot of communities, some of the biggest growth areas are health-related fields, and that it can be tough to get men who are in their 50s to go into jobs that they see as kind of caretaking jobs. And so it's kind of this norm change of kind of their understanding of what it means to be a caretaker and whether that's the kind of job that they're willing to take on if they were doing something completely different, like driving a truck. Would they want to go and do something where they're, caring for elderly people or something it's not just training, it's also changing their perceptions of what is kind of an appropriate job for them to do, which is
100%. No, 100%. You guys should figure out how we regulate artificial intelligence. Someone needs to figure that out. Because left unregulated, it's a big problem. Because any individual company can't afford on their own not to embrace it. Because if all their competitors are using it, then they'll go out of business. So that's a perfect place for the government to figure out how to regulate it without stifling innovation.
Great. Any students have any questions? Should we start with Ed?
Ed.
Sure, wait, whatever. It's your room, so whatever you want to do, you can.
So I'll just try to lead by example or follow by example. I had a question about media and politics in the current climate. So we've had a number of speakers here in recent weeks. Jeff Goldberg from The Atlantic talked about the kind of dynamic that's developed between the media and politicians in the Trump era, lots of hyperbole and everything else, and distraction from issues and talking about substance. So to what extent is that real? And if it is real, how do you deal with it?
I think it's very real, and I'd be lying if I told you I'd figured it out. We're kind of figuring it out real time. It's almost impossible to get the news out, if you will. And we're struggling, even in the short time I've been in government. I've been in public life for 6 years. 6 years ago, when I started this, our local paper, the Providence Journal, was something that many or most Rhode Islanders read. Certainly all influencers read. It's a shadow of its former self and not true. I think they're down to 16 reporters, so you can't rely on that. Broadcast news has become almost like talk radio. I do this one-on-one thing with live TV, and it started out, when I started 2 years ago, as a nice back and forth, and now they call it going one-on-one with the governor. Like it's all a fight, motif. So we're constantly trying to figure it out. We're relying a lot more on social media. I'm investing a lot in building my Facebook presence. We find that people trust Facebook, people trust their friends, and it's the only place where they'll really go and sort of hang out long enough to, engage with the topic. And it has to be much more hyper-local. That's also the only way that we're learning. I'm actually spending a lot more time with micro-local media in Rhode Island, because people do read that. But it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, and we're all figuring out as we go. Okay.
Governor Raimondo, thank you so much for coming today. You gave some really good examples of the way that sort of federal failures and gaps in their ability to regulate certain industries or issue areas sort of falls to the state. Can you talk a little bit about examples of if there are any places where the state, through innovation or really successful policymaking at the state level, can also sort of push policies up to the more national level and to try to get traction for really good ideas rather than sort of filling holes that the federal government has left, which maybe isn't all that applicable today because there are so many holes to fill, but broadly speaking.
Yeah, so I think what we were talking about, we just passed here in Rhode Island, we became the 4th state in the country to allow students to go to community college tuition free. That ought to be done at a federal level. The federal government has the money for it. There could be a massive expansion of the Pell Grant program. It would be pretty easy to do. So I'm hoping to show that it works here. People get jobs, people don't drop out, they graduate, they get a good job in community college, and hopefully, if enough states do that and show that the investment is worth it, that's something the federal government might roll out on a national level.
Thank you.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for coming. Can you just explain some of the ways that Rhode Island's leading the way in food security and how we're one of the first states to have our own food organizer?
What's your name?
My name is Joel.
Nice to meet you, Joel. So, yeah, Joel nailed it. So about a year ago, this is what happens if you have an Italian governor. There's a premium focused on food. So about a year ago, I signed an executive order appointing the state's first ever food czar. I have a full-time person, and all she does is think about our food strategy. And all joking aside, it's pretty amazing because we're coming up with a statewide food policy to support our local farms, encourage people to buy local, restaurants, big companies, Brown, to buy local food wherever possible, and then training opportunities. So we're rolling out job training opportunities, job training programs for like the commercial fishermen. You can make a good living as a commercial fisherman. It's an aging industry, so we're doing apprenticeship programs. Same thing for food. We're doing this new, really cool program. Kids in the juvenile justice system, we're teaching them food prep so they can, have a career in the food industry. So it's all about coordinating across the whole state, and it's big business. There's a lot of jobs in it, but also we need a sustainable, safe, local food supply, and that's what this person, Sue, does.
Thank you.
So that's another thing. Hopefully other states will do a similar thing.
Governor, I am a resident of Rhode Island and a former student. And my question is Rhode Island making a strong pitch to Jeff Bezos so that he'll move his new headquarters here?
Yeah, we are. I am. And absolutely. I think I'm not alone. Probably many other governors are doing that. But I think we have a great pitch, and Brown's part of my pitch, actually. Brown and RISD, there's very few places in America that can say they have, a top design school and a top computer science program across the street from one another in a city that's affordable and a great place to live. So my pitch is, we're part of the Boston ecosystem of talent, but it's a better place to live, lower cost of living, higher quality of life. So I'm going for it, yeah.
Hi, thank you both so much for coming. Governor, you mentioned something earlier that really caught my attention. You were discussing the Affordable Care Act, and you said you contacted your fellow female governors and asked them to reach out to their Republican senators and help sway the vote on that. I thought that was really striking and somewhat unique in such a partisan, highly divided government system we have right now. Would you say that being a female governor or a female in politics influences your ability to reach across the aisle, or where does that come from?
Yeah. So what I meant to say was I reached out to Republican governors, men and women. So, for instance, Governor Sandoval in Nevada, Republican. I reached out to him and worked with him because his two senators were swing votes, both Republicans. Anyway, I do think so. I think that if you can generalize, which nobody likes to do, including me, I think women tend to be maybe people a little more outcome oriented, so less about the partisanship and the politics and more about the, okay, but let's get it done. Let's get something done. Someone said that to me that they can tell that I'm like a working mom with kids. Because it's like, yeah, we don't have time for that. Let's just solve the problem. That's how I govern. John's laughing because he works for me. Like, I know. Stop talking about all that stuff. What's the answer? How do we get this done? And I think on balance, women are probably a little better at that.
Thank you.
Less fighting, more doing.
Hi, I'd like to thank both of you guys for taking the time to speak with us and giving us this opportunity. I know, Governor, that you mentioned in business and both in politics in the past and unfortunately recently that you've been one of very few women in the community that you were working in. And I was wondering if that led you to have self-doubts, and if it did, how you dealt with that, because it can be extremely intimidating to be one of the only women in a room full of guys.
Yeah. So I think everyone's filled with self-doubt, and I wonder all the time, did I handle that the best I could? Did I make the right decision? Especially in my world, because there's just not enough money to invest in everything we need to. So you're always making compromises, which are so difficult. I don't, though, focus on the gender part of it. I would say just focus on the substance of what you're doing, and just focus on the work, whatever that might be, and just care about that. Care about the people you're serving, and care about the work that you're doing, and just push yourself to do the best at the job that you can do, and that will help you, I think, to get over the self-doubt, and also blind you a little bit to the fact that you might suddenly find yourself as the only woman in a room. That's okay. Just keep doing your thing, doing your job.
Thank you.
Hi, Governor. Thank you for being here. My question is regarding the opioid epidemic, and in the absence of a strong federal unifying presence, what's the future of the opioid crisis, and what can governors and states do, especially in New England, regarding the situation?
Yeah, thank you for your question. That is a perfect example where I wish the federal government would show up and do its job. Because a lot of this is about resources. We actually know what works, and we need the resources to do it. So what have we done? We're doing an awful lot. By the way, we're not winning. Rhode Island is held out as a place of real innovation and leadership, which I'm proud of, except our death rate is not going down, or it's stagnating. Perfect example. We are doing medical assisted treatment in prisons. It's working. Previously, before we started this, if you were a user when you went into prison, abstinence was what they recommended, which means when you go back out of prison, you're so much more likely to die from an overdose. So we are using our Medicaid money to do medical assisted treatment. If the Affordable Care Act went away, or if Congress cut our funds, we'd have to cut that, people would die. That's what would happen. It's so sad. So we're focusing on prevention, trying to reduce the stigma, and then getting everybody into treatment. Addiction is a disease, recovery is possible, we've got to get everyone into treatment.
I think we have time just for one more quick question.
Hi, Governor. So first of all, I want to say I worked in the Executive Office of Commerce this summer. Totally drank the Kool-Aid. I love everything you guys are doing. And
Where are you from?
Chicago.
Okay,
Yeah.
stay here.
I mean, much more likely after spending a summer here, so we'll see. But yeah, so one thing I definitely learned was that when I hear the word Raimondo, I think economy. So I was wondering,
Nice! Success!
somebody who is running on fixing the economy would probably be very interested in adding approximately $20 million to the state coffers without a dime out of a taxpayer's pocket. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on recreational marijuana.
So, here's what I think. Here's what I think about it. I don't think it'll bring nearly that much money to Rhode Island. So I'm open to it. My position is I'm open to it. I'm not rushing to do it because every other state that's done it has struggled. And when I talked to Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado, he says, Gina, avoid it as long as possible. Because he said the revenue is a drop in the bucket. It's not there. By the time you account for more police officers, more kids sick in school, more regulation, that you have to set up a whole department to regulate it. He said, don't do it for the money, because the money's not there. So for me, decriminalizing recreational use of marijuana is easy, because that's about social justice. It should be a fine, not a crime, or not, maybe not even a fine. It's that I'm fine with. But I'm taking it slow as it relates to full-on legalization and regulation, because from everything I hear, it's not the panacea when it comes to the money, and quite frankly, edibles get into hands of kids and they get sick more than we realize. So we'll see how Massachusetts does.
Can
Thank
I
you very
ask
much.
one final question, just as my prerogative here as the moderator? So every day, we look at the news, and it's disheartening, right? There's violence, there are protests, there are natural disasters. It's kind of one thing after another. But what is most troubling, I think, is it feels like there are so many divisions in our country. And it seems to me that going forward, what we need to be thinking about is how that gets stitched back together, right? What does it mean to be an American? What are the values that we care about, and how do we start to come together again? And I just would like to close with maybe your thoughts on that, because I think leadership is the key to it. And I think it would be interesting for the kids to hear what you think about that issue.
So it's the most important issue there is. People just need to care about know their neighbors and care about the neighbors a lot more than they do. When I think about the last election and the fact that low-income Latinos, low-income African Americans, low-income women, all were divided against one another, for example, it makes me so sad, because they all share a commonality, which is, they need better education, better jobs, better health care, better safety net. But people are fighting each other. And I think a lot of it is people don't know each other. When I tell my kids, I'm threatening to take away their iPhones and give them flip phones. And they know what that is? Yeah, they know what a flip phone is. That's my constant threat. If they don't go to bed on time, you're getting a flip phone. And you can blame everything on social media, but it's a huge piece of the puzzle. Because for all of our connectivity, we're actually really not connected. We don't hang out, spend time, and know each other. Actually sit down and get to know one another, and we need to rekindle basic human relationships and communication. Because when you do that, you realize our shared humanity, who care? It's not, way, way more fundamental than Democrat or Republican. And we have to get back in the business of simply caring about one another and taking the edge off of the violence and the anger and the fighting, which is in politics in a big way. And just my commissioner of education talks a lot about love, and everyone teases him. It's like, the guy that says we just need to love each other. There's a lot of truth to it. Tolerance. That's why, as governor, I've been so opposed to when I hear anything that sounds like racism, discrimination on the basis of national origin or religion. That we have to put a lid on that kind of hatred. Put a lid on it. It's not okay. Stop the social norms that say hate is okay, racism is okay, sexism is okay. It is not. And spend time with one another. And that's why we're focusing hyper-local. I spend way more time in local coffee shops than I ever did, getting to know Rhode Islanders and encouraging Rhode Islanders to get to know one another. Once upon a time, we had these institutions, whatever they may have been. Public school PTO, church, the famous bowling loan, the bowling leagues. There's a lot to it. And we've lost a lot of our sense of community when those institutions went away. So I'm not telling you to join a bowling league, and I'm a terrible bowler, But we have to come out of our houses and come out of our phones and get to know one another and care about one another, so that when I ask for money to take care of people who are dying from overdose, it's not a Democratic issue. It's saving lives of somebody's kid. And I care about them regardless of their race, their gender, their religion, or their political party. And that's what we need to do.
And stay in Rhode Island.
And stay in Rhode Island. Did I mention that?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for participating today. And thank you, Governor Raimondo, for joining us and inspiring us with your model of public service. Thanks.